Hello and good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depends what time zone you're in, but welcome to another edition of Whale NFA, that new segment here at Whale where we discuss different quote unquote investing aspects for the NFT space. As the name suggests, this is not financial advice. And again, I want to reiterate that this is not financial advice and there's absolutely no substitute for doing your own research. Hopefully, some of you caught last week's inaugural edition. This week, I'm just going to go for about 30 minutes, just kind of talking about mental models and how to think about different elements within the metaverse specifically. For those of you new to the community, I'm your host, Ilus Gavia. I am a recovering TradFi professional. I have a background as both a consultant and capital markets, where I spent over 15 years. And I guess let's just dive right in. So I'm sure all of you have seen the talk about Metaverse land in the past few weeks and how tokens like Mana and Decentraland really took off, especially after Facebook rebranded themselves as Meta and decided that they were now going to focus on the Metaverse. But as much as crypto is an innovative and new technology, a lot of the things we're seeing have elements that are associated with real life, with meat space, as it were. And at least in my view, again, this is a personal view, land in the metaverse is really no different than investing in real estate in the real world. Now, I'm going to assume, and maybe this is a dangerous assumption, but I'm going to assume that many of you have heard that in real estate, the three most important and critical elements about picking any real estate in real life is location, location, location. Yes, it's the exact same item for all three, but this heuristic, while simple, in real life actually really covers the complicated dynamics behind property markets, not just locally, but around the world. And it really does apply at different degrees of granularity, whether you're talking at the very macro or very micro level. But let's take for an example. When you compare average pricing of property in, let's say, Omaha versus New York City, it's not really a surprise that property in New York City is much more expensive. A lot of that has to do with attributes like interconnectedness with various different countries and cities due to the airports. The fact that one of them is on a major body of water, has shipping ports. But when you also look at within cities, proximity, again, proximity of how close you are to certain features makes different areas more desirable. So if you compare, let's say if you're in Hong Kong, if you look at central versus new territories, well, central is going to be much more expensive because, as the name suggests, it's central. That's also where all the financial companies are located. So in meat space, access to these locations, and a lot, as you mentioned, as you heard me mention, some of it has to do with transportation. It's extremely important, and transportation connections are key elements. But what happens when access is instantaneous, that you don't have to travel? In most metaverses that I've come across, and I'm not going to say all because I don't want to make a generalization when there could be lands that don't follow this, but at least the ones I've tried, you can pretty much gain access to any land parcel anywhere without needing to cover or cross any other area. So think about that. Like when we're talking about the case of New York versus Omaha, New York is easier to get to, so it's more desirable. In the metaverse, you can be dead central to the map, or you could be at the fringe. It doesn't really matter. You can still get to it by following a link. So if the example of in that example, if you don't have to traverse, if you don't have to cross another piece of land, why would one piece of land be more valuable than another? So how do we think about this land in the metaverse? I'd argue that location, location, location still matters, because that proximity just needs to be reevaluated slightly, because that ease of access isn't important. And again, not non-financial advice, but I'm going to kind of walk you through how I think of some of these components. So let's take the case of Cryptovoxels or Decentraland. And I'm going to go ahead and say I do not currently have land in either of these. And when I start looking at these, and part of the reason why I haven't really purchased anything yet, my first question is, What is near this parcel? Yes, I don't have to worry about crossing to it, but what is it next to? Is it next to another property that has a reason that people are already going to it? Does it is it next to a game? Why, like, what is next to it? So let's take an example. I find that examples are make things come to life. In Decentraland, there is the Alice in Wonderland Wonder Quest Temple. I know many of you in the community were there for the stream, but this Australian DJ musician has an entire community in the metaverse, and she owns a pretty big parcel where every other month, it seems, there is a new event. So we know that there is, with some regularity, her community will be at that property. So what if the land next to it were for sale? Why is this important? Again, you're not Alice in Wonderland, most likely, if you're listening to this, but why would having land next to hers be important? Well, what if I'm an artist and I want to display my work? I know that her community will be coming to her plot at least once every other month. So that means that if I have the land right next to hers, that means I might be able to get some of her community to come in and check out my artwork. So again, proximity is important, but um, I can because I can attract her concert goers into my space. But what if I don't have that ready-made stream? What if that there is no other use case behind it? If I'm a game developer, I have to make sure I'm developing a really, really good game and get word of mouth out there in order for people to come and try my game out. But again, if I'm positioned next to something that already has a community, I can leverage that same audience to try and test my game. Even if I only get 1% of her audience, that's 1% of her audience that I didn't have to market to. So that's why. So that's one of the things that I look to when I start evaluating pieces of land. And we're already seeing some of this dynamic happen in real time in Sandbox. Now, for those of you that are familiar with Sandbox, and let me see if I can figure out how to share my screen here. Let's see. Again, apologies, my first time running the thing myself. So you should all be able to see the map of Sandbox right now. So different to some of the other land sales, Sandbox has been selling their map in chunks, and they tend to sell them anchored around a specific partnership. The most recent land sales were around Snoop Dogg, and I'm going to assume that most people know who Snoop Dogg is, but if not, just know that he's a very well-known musician. In the recent land sale, the entire map that was sold, which was about this piece here, it's very small, sold out in 15 seconds. Again, proximity to Snoop Dogg was important, and it all sold out in 15 seconds. So the benefit with Sandbox is that since they're doing these sales in chunks around anchor tenants, anchor estates, you have time to try and, at least if you don't recognize the artist or the anchor, to research it and understand if this will be a desirable location. Now, proximity is one thing, but why did plots further out sell as well? Probably demand, because we're still trying to figure out the utility. But plots like this, they're slightly different color, don't just benefit from being next to Snoop Dogg. As you can see, they also come with certain NFTs. So like this plot over here is a little further out. You see, it doesn't come with anything. But this premium plot that you're paying more for, you're also paying for these NFTs. One thing that made the Snoop Dogg land sale interesting, and again, I saw this sell out in 15 seconds, is that you have these NFTs that give you early access to concerts. So you're not just paying for the plot of land, you're getting an NFT that gives you access to future concerts. So at this point, the land has more utility than just being next to something. If any of you listened in last week when I was speaking with DC about axes, you might recall that we wound up speaking a little bit about the different categories of land. So Genesis were the central plots, and then for Mystic, Arctic, you see the prices declining. They're getting further away from the center. again, proximity. But the other thing that DC mentioned was the roadmap for axes. That there's talk that having the different plots will give you different utility. But beyond that, that you might be able to earn money. That the land will generate certain amounts of income for you. Now, that is still to be determined, but understanding future utility is something I look for as well, because even if it doesn't fully materialize, it will generally, for a well-established project, it will give you at least a direction to think about of what they're going to develop. And I can then at least consider that future utility when I'm looking at determine if I want to buy something. Now, again, not financial advice, but you're starting to see elements in here in NFT land sales in the metaverse that don't really exist in real life. Now, I mentioned that a lot of the elements in the metaverse are replicating what happens in real life, but there are some elements like what happened in Avigachis that they have an incentivized auction. And what does the incentivized auction mean? That means that if you bid and you lose out, you actually get paid the difference between what you bid and the winning bid. So there's an incentive for you to bid on the land. So even if you don't necessarily know what the land can do for you, there's an incentive for you to bid on it. Now, there's again this element of not wanting to miss out and understanding that you can get paid to bid. But what happens if you win a parcel, but you knew nothing about what you were bidding on? That's a trap that I suspect many people might fall for. And again, I want to highlight this and just for somebody to be aware. Maybe this works for you. Maybe it doesn't. Again, it's not financial advice. But if you're just trying to get the land, or excuse me, if you're trying to buy the land, great. If you win the bid, perfect. But what if you are not trying to buy the land and you're just trying to get paid to bid and create a market? Well, you should do your research beforehand, because if you just ape into it, you can wind up with a parcel that is nowhere near anything central, and you're never going to be able to off-sell it, or rather offload it, unless you find someone that wants to buy it. So what I wanted to share with you guys today was a little bit of more my mental framework when I'm assessing metaverse land purchases. And I still rely on the location, location, location. But I also start looking in to see if there are additional perks associated with those sales, whether it's an NFT, concert passes, like in the Snoop Dogg sale, maybe in the case of Axie's possible roadmap, that there will be income coming from the land, or that there's an incentivization just to bid on it. But I still want to understand what the utility is, because if I'm bidding on the property and I'm incentivized, I still want to hope that if I get it, I might be able to do something with it. Now, I know it's very tempting in these land rushes to try and just buy anything to have a foothold. But if we go back to let me reshare my screen. If we go back to the sandbox, do you really want to make sure, do you really want to wind up with a plot that is maybe, if I can just get there. Sorry, my computer's being slow. There we go. That is next to Binance. Now, I have absolutely no idea what an exchange needs to be doing in the metaverse, but Binance is actually in all four corners. If I can find it, they're down here as well. There it is. You see? So I don't know about you, but without understanding why they're there, I don't necessarily know why I would want to buy a parcel that's not more centrally located or next to a brand maybe like Adidas or Walking Dead or Snoop Dogg. One thing I did discuss with a friend of mine a few months ago when this sale happened, if I can just get, excuse me guys, here we go. There's a newspaper out of Hong Kong that bought a massive estate. This seemed very weird to me at the time, and I couldn't understand why my friend was thinking about buying a parcel next to it. And I want to walk you through this example because, to help understand why this actually wound up probably being a good investment for them. Because again, why would a newspaper want to buy land in the metaverse? Again, this is an industry that many people consider to be very stodgy, very old school, that struggled with staying relevant in Web 2.0. So why would they get into Web 3.0? Well, South China Morning Post decided that they are going to recreate Hong Kong and other pieces of Chinese and Hong Kong history in the metaverse. The thing that I didn't initially appreciate, and I'm sharing this with you, I didn't appreciate that with over 100 years of history and photography, they have archives and they can recreate elements that no longer exist. In the 1990s, the famous, or rather infamous, Kowloon Walled City was destroyed and demolished. Doesn't exist anymore. South China Morning Post is going to recreate it so you can actually experience it, what it used to be like in the metaverse based on their archives. So I didn't appreciate that this could be an interesting use case that at least I haven't heard of since I came across this. So the utility to being next to it is beyond any NFTs that they may have given you, is what happens if when they're recreating Hong Kong, they decide that they need more land with which to build. At that point, they might need to expand. And if you have a property adjacent to that, it's possible that they may make you an offer. And if they need to expand and you have the one parcel that they need, that puts you in a much better negotiating position with them. So again, that's just a mental framework to give you an ability to think about how to start assessing these. But again, not financial advice, and there is no substitute for doing your own research. Because at the end of the day, only you can determine if the utility and use cases you see are actually valuable or not. And that's mainly what I wanted to start giving you guys at least a framework to think about. I could go into behavioral biases associated with metaverse, but that's in and of itself an entirely different discussion. And I figure we can cover that on a different day. But what I will say is that by having a mental framework, it helps protect you from the fear of missing out, FOMOing, which in and of itself is a behavioral bias. And it also helps you from just kind of jumping into something without doing your research. Again, you're responsible for your own things. Don't invest what you're not willing to lose. And with that, I hope that I've been able to provide you at least some insight as to how I'm thinking about assessing these different metaverses before I make a purchase. And since I don't see any questions in the stream chat, I'm going to call it a day and say thank you very much for joining, and I'll see you guys next week.